Okay, ArkCDA members, let's look at one more piece of technology that you can use in your rehearsals and in your choir program going forward. This last piece of technology is a broad category known as DAWs. DAWs, or DAW, stands for Digital Audio Workstation. And you're probably already familiar with what a DAW is, whether you realize it or not. GarageBand, one of the most popular DAWs, is available on any Mac. Another free version of a DAW is called Audacity, and many of you have probably used something like this in the past. Some of you may be familiar with professional versions of a digital audio workstation like Pro Tools or Apple's Logic Pro or something like Ableton Live. All of these programs, all these pieces of software, do very similar things. Many of them record audio and allow you to manipulate software instruments. But today, we're only going to focus on the part of these programs that records audio. So I have 3 ways that you can use these sort of programs in your choral program. The first way is in your rehearsals. If you set up a digital audio workstation to record your choir during rehearsal, you have an easy way to immediately play back what your singers just performed. And this is a way to take the responsibility that you normally bear to listen, adjust, give feedback, and really put some more of that onto the singers themselves. We, of course, expect singers to do this, but it's a really powerful thing for singers to hear a recording of themselves right after they've sung something. It's different than them performing and trying to listen in the moment. That's a valuable skill, but hearing themselves right afterwards will help develop that ability to critically listen. So here's how you might use this in a rehearsal. Imagine that you have a digital audio workstation like GarageBand on your computer, and you've connected a microphone to your computer. Now when you're rehearsing, you can record your ensemble singing in GarageBand. And then right after you have the final cutoff, play back what the ensemble just sang. And you can give a moment for students to offer critique and feedback in areas of improvement. And then you can try it again. And this is very similar to how we would normally run a rehearsal, except now we're pulling in students and making them more involved. And one of the nice things is if you can project this onto the big screen, students can see each of their performances recorded as you go. And so you're visualizing the progress of the ensemble. You might see in one track the first recording. You talk about it, decide what parts need to improve, and then record again. And now students will visually see a second track. And over time, you start to see the progress that your group has made over time. You can even go back and play each of the recordings from the beginning to the end to chart your progress and notice the improvements. It's a powerful tool to visualize and externalize our rehearsals. So that's the first way you can use a DAW. The second way that you could use a DAW in rehearsal is a little more complicated, but this has been one of the most valuable things that my groups have been able to do in the last year. And this is multi-track recording. So, like the previous example, imagine that you've set up a DAW program on your computer, like GarageBand. And instead of having one microphone connected to your computer, now imagine that you have 4 microphones. And you pull 4 singers down. Now, each of those singers sings into their own microphone and records onto their own individual track. So, after you've rehearsed with them, now you have 4 tracks, each of them with each singer's recording. You can go back and you can play it for the singers. You can hear the overall sound. You can talk about balance, blend, tone, but you can also dial it in and listen to an individual singer's performance or how 2 or 3 of the singers sound together. It's also a neat thing to show singers the waveform of their track. So we think of this as how the sound wave looks in the recording. singers can really easily see the amplitude or the volume of their performance. And this is a great way to help shy singers or less confident singers understand that they can actually sing out and it will appear on the recording. And so it's a sort of a visual feedback tool for them. We'll show you a couple examples of this in a moment. The third way that you can use these digital audio workstation tools is to create really robust practice tracks. Now, instead of just you using a DAW on your own individual computer, this requires a cloud-based DAW, something like Soundtrap or BandLab, which many of you might have used in the last year. These sorts of DAWs are web-based. You access them through a website instead of downloading software to your computer. The nice thing about this is each student can have their own account, and you can create practice tracks that you send to all the students and they can access on their accounts. So let's look at some examples of all these three uses. The first one we talked about was how to use this in a rehearsal. I'm going to show you a DAW that I use called Ableton Live, but this is very similar to many other types of DAWs out there. So you'll notice that there are tracks for each of these singers. This was, we did multi-track recording, but I want you to imagine that instead of individual singers, each of these takes is the entire ensemble. We could use this in rehearsal by creating our first recording, our first run through with the choir, talking about the things we can improve, then adding a second track and recording them. And then after we've performed, do some reflection and feedback on that track as well. And continue doing this until you have a number of tracks and then play through each one to show the improvement over time. The second way we talked about was multi-track recording. And this is actually what you see on this screen, where each individual singer has a microphone. We did this in groups of 4. You could do this in groups of 2, or if you're willing to pay for the equipment, you can do this in larger groups as well. It just gets pricier the more microphones you have. And so what you just heard was a multi-track version of the recording. And now what I want to show you is Soundtrap. Soundtrap and BandLab.com are very similar. I prefer Soundtrap, but it is a paid version. BandLab is free if that makes it more accessible for you. So here is a practice track that I created for my singers for the song Ad Astra. You'll notice that there's a piano track. This is just the accompaniment. There are soprano, alto, tenor, and bass vocal guides. And then at the very top is a place for a student recording. So every student receives their own copy of this, and they can choose to hear the entire project played, or they can focus on individual or certain tracks. So here's how it sounds with everything playing at once. Now you can imagine if you were a tenor, you might want to focus on your tenor part. So we'll turn off the other voice parts for a moment, and we'll just play the piano and the tenor part. If I was a tenor, I could practice recording myself singing along with the tenor vocal guide. And I could do this as many times as I wanted. Play it back, hear myself, make corrections, and do some self-reflection. This is a great tool to structure your students' at-home practice time or outside of class practice time. Another great use for this is that students can sing with all the parts, or they can lower the volumes of certain parts. So maybe the part that they're singing is emphasized, but they still can hear the other parts. So here's an example of that.
Ada astra per aspera, ada astra per aspera, ada astra.
Okay, so let's talk about the equipment that you might need to make all of these things possible. If you're just creating practice tracks like what you see on the screen now, really all you need to do is set up a BandLab for Education account or a Soundtrap for Education account, and those links are in the description of this video. You don't need any specialized microphones necessarily for that. The microphone on your computer will probably work. Now, if you want to use a digital audio workstation in Rehearsal, you'll probably need a little bit more equipment. I wouldn't recommend using Soundtrap or BandLab for this purpose, although it is possible. It's better to use software that's actually downloaded to your computer. So you might have GarageBand on one of your devices. If you need a free digital audio workstation, you might try Audacity. Frankly, it looks somewhat outdated, but it's been updated recently, and it's free, and it works very well. Some other programs you might consider trying is Logic Pro, which is a professional level DAW at a very reasonable price. Other tools like Pro Tools might be a little bit more advanced than what you would want. You could try something like Ableton Live, which is the software program I use. It is a little bit more complex. So you'll want to have some sort of digital audio workstation software. You'll also want a microphone setup. The easiest way to do this is to get a quality USB mic that you can plug straight into your computer. This will allow you to record the entire ensemble, give them feedback, let them reflect. But if you want to do multi-track recording, you'll need some extra pieces of equipment. Instead of a USB microphone, you'll want to get an audio interface. This is a device that plugs into your computer, and then you can plug in microphones to that audio interface. And this allows you to use what we might call regular microphones instead of USB microphones. I would recommend using condenser style instead of dynamic microphones. Condenser style microphones will pick up more detail in the sound, and you can also use them to record an entire ensemble more easily if you want to. So the setup that I used was I used Ableton Live as the DAW on my computer. I plugged in an audio interface, and then I plugged in 4 separate microphones into that audio interface. And each of those microphones was on a stand, and I had 4 students standing at each of those stations. I also connected a headphone splitter to my audio interface and ran headphone extensions to each of my students. That way they could plug in their headphones and hear themselves. You don't have to do that. You could simply plug in the audio interface to your sound system, but we found that, especially for middle school singers, when we're doing multi-track recording, they like to be able to hear themselves, but not necessarily the entire rest of the class. So that's the equipment that you might need, and the links for all of those are in the description of this video. So I hope this has been helpful. Digital audio workstations can be a really powerful tool to use in your rehearsals and to help your students in their practice outside of class. ArkCDA members, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer. I hope it's refreshing and that you feel renewed for our upcoming school year. And I hope that some of these technology tools are things that you can use to improve your rehearsals and your students' independence and confidence as singers. Have a great summer.